Hi, I'm Jeff Chang. I'm a writer who lives out here at the edge of the Pacific, where the tides of the past and the future meet in the ever-evolving present, where I like to pull out my notebook and pen and try to make sense of the world. Welcome to Notes from the Edge, KALW's news show and podcast. So in each episode, we're going to look at our rapidly changing world from a different angle. We'll invite in visionaries who might see things in those shifting tides that we can't, who might be able to tell us where the currents are taking us. 3 years ago, a company named OpenAI introduced an app that called ChatGPT, the beginning of a new era in artificial intelligence. As you may know, I mainly make my living as a writer, and I was annoyed to learn that many of these AI models have been trained on my published books and the books of countless others without our knowledge, our consent, or any compensation. But I also like to think of myself as an early adopter, and I was intrigued by what AI could do. I've spent the last 3 years writing a biography of Bruce Lee in Asian America, and when I was writing, I experimented with Perplexity and some other AI-based apps to see if it could help me with research. But I found a lot of the time it was just making stuff up. And most of the stuff I wanted to know about was well beyond the reach of these apps. It turns out that actually, despite all the claims you'll hear, not all the world's knowledge has been captured by AI. Overall, my experience was mixed, leaning disappointing. After I finished the book, though, I was still curious, so I enrolled in a continuing ed class at Cal, and that's when it started making sense to me. I used ChatGPT and Claude to help me plot book tour itineraries. I even had it compose negative reviews so I could prepare myself for any hateration I'm gonna get. I chatted with GPT late into the night about the meaning of Luther Vandross and Aretha Franklin. I carried on conversations with it in Olelo, Hawaii, practicing my Hawaiian language skills. Even as I was having all this fun, existential questions were pecking at the back of my brain. Would it destroy all the jobs in media and the arts and take away work from my friends, my sons, and their entire generation? Would it amplify the ills of social media? Would it expand surveillance over everything that we do? Would it suck up all our water and hoard all the energy? Some say AI is going to solve all of humanity's problems. Some say AI is going to end humanity itself. What is clear is that AI is not going away. It's gone from a sci-fi story to a real tool in our lives in less than 3 years. ChatGPT alone is now handling over 2.5 billion prompts a day. I know this. Yesterday, I asked ChatGPT, and it told me. On this episode of Notes from the Edge, we are joined in the studio by tech journalist Karen Hao and the scientist and ethicist Rumman Chowdhury to talk about artificial intelligence, poised at the edge of mass adoption and perhaps at an inflection point for the field, and maybe for all of us. We'll try to get beyond the hype to the real. I've also invited an old friend, DJ Shadow, to talk about humans and machines and how they've sometimes made incredible music together. We'll be playing some of that music throughout the episode. But we begin with Karen Hao. Karen is a best-selling author and award-winning reporter known for her coverage of artificial intelligence. She was the first journalist to profile OpenAI. In her book, Empire of AI, about the company and the birth of this now ubiquitous technology, is a must-read, and to my mind, it's one of the most important books of the decade.
Oh, thank you.
I really believe that. Karen, welcome to Notes from the Edge.
Thank you so much for having me, Jeff.
So you studied engineering and energy at MIT, two things that figure a lot in this industry.
I've actually never thought about that.
Yeah. How did she have it? You've never thought about that, really?
I've never thought about the fact that energy studies, yeah, that's funny.
Wow, okay. I feel like the next question might be sort of a therapist type of question. Like, how did you decide to switch sides and become a tech journalist?
Yeah, so I very much thought that I was going to work in the tech industry the rest of my life, but it was based on this theory of change that I could build technology products that would then create social change. I was really interested in the climate crisis and how do we mitigate the climate crisis, and can we design products that just naturally end up changing behaviors. And when I started working in the tech industry, I quickly realized within a year that the way that Silicon Valley operates does not allow for the production of technologies for the social good. It allows for the production of technologies that are profitable. In fact, oftentimes profitable technologies were antithetical to technologies in the social benefit. And so I had a bit of an existential crisis. And so I sort of naively just made the connection. Well, I like writing, and writing for social change is journalism. So maybe I should go into journalism. I sort of got, initially, I thought pigeonholed into tech reporting. I actually didn't really want to report on tech. I wanted to continue reporting on environmental issues because that was my thing. And I couldn't get a job as an environmental reporter, but people were willing to give me a chance as a tech reporter. And then I fell into AI reporting, and then I fell in love with AI reporting, and I have now been doing it for 7 years.
I was going to make a joke about Asian parents and be like, oh, so you decided to go from a thriving industry into a dying industry.
Oh, don't worry. My parents definitely had that conversation with me.
Can you tell us what your definition is of artificial intelligence?
So it's funny because this is actually always the hardest question, because people generally think that AI is just ChatGPT or Alexa or Siri or, something that talks to them. But actually, AI is a collection of so many different types of technologies: your Facebook newsfeed algorithm, your Google search engine, the spam filter in your email, your Netflix recommendation algorithm, reverse image search. Like, all of these are different types of AI technologies. And the loose thread that ties them together is the fact that they are each trying to mimic some aspect of a capability that we associate with being humans.
You were the first person to interview folks at OpenAI. You did the first sort of coverage and profile in the media. What drew you to that, and where did it go?
Yeah, what drew me to it, so I went embedded within the company for 3 days in 2019. And at the time, I thought this would be a worthwhile exercise because there were a lot of changes happening within OpenAI. They had just hit upon GPT-2 two generations before ChatGPT.
Let's go back and maybe if you could unpack the difference between GPT and ChatGPT.
So in order to get ChatGPT to appear to talk to you, you start by taking a bunch of data from the internet. This is people's social media posts. This is Wikipedia pages. This is news articles.
It's my books.
It's your books.
Millions and millions of books, yes.
That these companies just download off the internet and then pour into what's called a neural network. It's this piece of software that is really, really powerful at pattern recognition. So it's parsing through all of the language that has been downloaded from these text files and these posts and these articles. And then there's this process where humans, like workers, have to clean up the model, either based on the content moderation, where you're now trying to take out as much toxic content that you downloaded from the internet as possible. Also, by trying to curate the way that the model ultimately responds to a user. Because when you first train the AI system on the internet, it will actually respond in kind of weird ways of word association. Like when you ask a question, it doesn't recognize that it's supposed to generate an answer. It will just generate more questions that sound like the question that you asked, because it's playing these pattern matching games. And so you have these teams of people that will actually show it examples of, this is what dialogue looks like. This is how you should answer when someone asks this kind of question. And through that process, we'll also teach it kind of like mannerisms and a personality to try and cultivate a friendly chatbot that says things like, great question, or wow, this is the most brilliant idea ever, before actually like responding to your query. Once that model is then kind of done, it is put into a product. So like ChatGPT, the model exists on a server somewhere. server is just another word for data center. But in order for you to then be able to engage with it, you need an app on your phone, or you need a website that you can open up in your browser. And so developers will then create that kind of interface. So then when you type into your browser, or you type into your app, or speak to the app, it will then ping that model in the server somewhere. And that model then generates an answer that comes back to you based on all of the language that it was trained on from the internet, as well as the different things that the human workers were telling it makes a good answer.
So we interrupted the story. Let's go back.
Yeah, so OpenAI hits upon GPT-2, and Sam Altman officially became the CEO. They raised $1 billion from Microsoft. They originally started as a nonprofit, but then created this for-profit arm within it, all in 2019. And so I was covering AI at MIT Technology Review at the time, and what I was drawn to was the story that OpenAI told at the time, which was that they were a fundamentally different type of company than other Silicon Valley companies. They were very mission-driven, very focused on creating this technology for the benefit of humanity, not focused at all on commercial intentions. And I thought, if they have really solved this, they've created some kind of self-governance structure, then we should analyze it as a case study and learn from that. And basically what I realized after spending time there, and also doing a lot of other interviews outside of my time there, I realized that this was just a story. It was a facade. And what was actually happening was that this organization was exactly like every other Silicon Valley company, if not the most extreme manifestation of Silicon Valley values.
So you continued to follow the company after your initial reporting, and you spent the last 5 years working on your book, Empire of AI. Why did you think this story was so important?
I think in order to understand what AI is, where AI is going, who AI came from, you have to understand OpenAI as a company, because there are so many aspects of the shape of the technology today that were decided upon within their walls. The fact that ChatGPT chats was a decision made by OpenAI. Even the fact that when it chats, it kind of will generate the text one after another as though it's thinking. That was a decision made by OpenAI employees. The fact that this system is built on a model that is ultimately trained on the English language internet, like that was also a decision made by OpenAI employees. So you really cannot understand why we ended up here without that context. And also, once you understand that context, it becomes incredibly obvious that this was not inevitable. It was just the product of these human decisions made by a very small group of humans that had a very narrow conception of how the world works and the way the world should be.
One of the things that you make clear in the book is that there's a lot more other models that use less energy, that might not depend upon scale. Why is this particular model the primary model that we're talking about these days?
AI is a collection of all of these different types of technologies, like I mentioned. And when you think about some of the things that we would want AI to do, like we want AI to diagnose cancer faster and more accurately so that we can actually, hopefully, kick that cancer. You do not train a cancer detection system on the internet. The internet data is going to do nothing for you in terms of detecting cancer. What you want is to train it on MRI scans with cancer and without cancer so that it picks out the pattern of what cancer looks like in an MRI scan. That system, you only need a small amount of highly curated data, which means that you do not need a ginormous supercomputer. You do not need massive data centers to develop or deploy the model. You also don't need content moderation because you're not actually scraping awful stuff off the internet to pour into your model. You're just putting in the most pristine, relevant data to the problem. And so this type of large-scale, indiscriminate training of quote-unquote general-purpose AI tools, or the building of the so-called everything machine, is only one approach and not actually giving us some of the things that Silicon Valley promises it will give us in terms of like, oh, AI is going to cure cancer. Like, who doesn't want an everything machine that will help solve all of our problems? I mean, like, throughout history, there have been charlatans that have promised us that they have the potion to cure all of our ills, you know? And when someone promises you that, you should actually automatically become suspicious. But for whatever reason, it is still a persuasive story that we keep falling for again and again and again. And Silicon Valley knows this. And that just allows them to continue convincing us to cede more and more of our agency and power.
I could ask you a million more questions. Stick around. We have so much more to talk about. I'm Jeff Chang. This is Notes from the Edge of Artificial Intelligence. And that was A Narrow Escape from DJ Shadow's 2023 album, Action Adventure. Stay tuned for a conversation with him. But now, joining us in the studio is Dr. Rumman Chowdhury. Rumman is one of the leading voices for responsible AI. She's a co-founder of Humane Intelligence, a nonprofit advancing community-driven AI auditing and evaluation, and recently launched a public benefits corporation to continue that work. She previously worked at Accenture AI and led the ethics team at Twitter, pre-Elon Musk. She's advised international organizations on AI policy and was engaged by the Biden administration's State Department to help shape the U.S. policy around artificial intelligence. Rumman, it's great to have you on Notes from the Edge.
Thank you so much for having me. Really excited to be here.
So you trained as a political scientist, yeah? And then you became a data scientist. What drew you to technology and AI?
So we kind of have to rewind time a bit to like the more innocent days of technology.
Okay.
Because I'm an old head. Overall, I would say I have always found data as a fascinating way of understanding the human condition. That is why I'm a quantitative social scientist. So asking questions like, why do people vote the way they vote? Are school lunch programs better for helping children do well in school? Like getting the empirical evidence behind things, right? That's always what's fascinated me. Now I'm asking, what are the kinds of product features that might make this useful for somebody? How can this technology and product improve someone's life? And, you know, I was of the first wave of professional data scientists. This is when Harvard Business Review called it the sexiest job of the 21st century. So it was this Wild West. Everyone was like, wow, what is this data science thing? And I really saw it as the thinking person's profession.
Let's switch gears a little bit and talk about this term artificial intelligence, because it's a term that goes back 7 decades, maybe more. And it's evolved a lot. And so I'm wondering, how should people understand artificial intelligence in this moment?
So most simplistically put, artificial intelligence models utilize data to make predictions about outcomes. So how does that apply to like ChatGPT? They're like, well, ChatGPT isn't making predictions. Actually, it is. Mm-hmm. So what all of these language models are basically language predictors. You know, people in the early days, people called it fancy autocorrect. That's kind of one way to think about it too. It's just like a very sophisticated autocorrect. You know, you want to reply with a boilerplate, thanks for your email, so excited to chat. Mm-hmm. And now you can just like hit tab and it fills it in for you. Yeah, it mimics, it learns from what you have typed in previously to generate in your style of writing.
You've had it write in the style of Dr. Rumman Chowdhury before?
Okay, this is like, my dirty secret. Like, so, because like, well, sometimes people are like, oh, can you answer these like 3 questions? And, and I'm like, man, like I'm too tired. I'm like doing it at 2 a.m. I will literally say, perplexity, answer these questions in the style of Dr. Chowdhury. And then, I mean, of course, I review it and I make sure it's something I would actually say and I correct it. But honestly, it is kind of nice to have like that baseline thinking done for me. Some people refer to AI as an enthusiastic intern, and I really do treat it like that. I'm like, read this article, tell me what it says,
Like for me, using it as a tool to be able to do all these tasks that I'm just, like, how do I get from New York City to Baltimore?
Ooh,
And all
I
these
wouldn't
other
do
kinds of
that
things,
though.
right? No,
But I wouldn't do that.
you wouldn't do
Actually,
that.
it's really funny you say that. So
Okay.
you had mentioned my nonprofit, Human Intelligence.
Yes.
One of the projects we did last year was with the National Institutes for Standards and Technology, NIST. NIST is like a testing body of the United States government. And they had a program called ARIA, Assessing Risks and Impacts of AI. And we actually did this challenge for anybody in America to red team, like test AI models. And we had these different scenarios. One of the scenarios was actually helping write directions. And AI is actually pretty bad at that.
Really?
Yeah, well, because it doesn't understand context. If you say, get me from Boston to Baltimore, it doesn't know direction. It doesn't think the way we think. It's just, again, like mashing together things that are predictably sensible sounding. And directions are one of the worst, even though it allegedly operates at a PhD level.
Why is that?
Well, there's 2 things. One is that human beings are incredibly complex creatures, and it is an immense amount of hubris to say you can fully recreate what a human is and does the way we process information. There is no more efficient processing tool than the human brain. So there's sort of the hubris of assuming you can do that. The second part is it just depends on what they prioritize measuring. So when there is a new model and all the media outlets are breathlessly reporting on the performance of that model, this is where my data science background kicks in, you have to ask, how is performance being measured? And if you look at what the tests are, it is programming tests, it is math tests, but they're not doing like sort of basic knowledge or contextual. That's kind of weird and hard to define. So it's optimized for the things it's tested on.
What you're saying is it's a tool that is capable of major failures of not getting me to Baltimore properly. I think, though, like it was good for trying to put together book itineraries. So
yeah, and one reason it does that task well is like these language models, they are information synthesis machines. They create content based on the content in the training data. But it's not necessarily fully retrieving, the way like a Google would. And yeah, it'll give you citations, et cetera. But then to your point, this is where hallucinations can just come up with completely wrong things. But that would be why it does book tours pretty well. Because what it's doing is it's sort of scouring all the data it has of like other authors, what cities they go to, what cities they go to next, and then shoving it all together into an itinerary.
We met 5 years ago at the Pacific School of Religion, and you were the first person to really get me thinking about sort of the ethics of AI. And at the time, you were talking about the way the technology was developing as akin to colonialism in the 18th and the 19th century. You called it algorithmic
colonialism. Yeah, and it's interesting because now people are using the term broligarchs to refer to the new robber barons, the new captains of industry. So there's multiple moving parts to it. So number one is that the fundamental data that AI is built on is the data of the internet. It is data that was supposed to be used in the common good and the public good that they are now taking as this resource to then literally sell back to you, right? And I want to go back to something you said in the very beginning where you had said they refer to it as the world's knowledge, right? But the internet is by definition not only Western, it is American. And it's not only just American, it is Silicon Valley. Not only is Silicon Valley, it is white men in Silicon Valley. So to define that as the world's knowledge fundamentally is colonialist. And another way in which colonialism rears its head is this data that is used, that is clean, that is stripped of anything harmful, like explicit content, et cetera. So all this dirty work happens overwhelmingly in parts of Africa. It happens in India and the Philippines. And people in a particular part of the world are exploited so that the rest of us can have a pristine internet. And, we can make cute pictures of cats with party hats.
Tell us a little bit more about this invisible labor.
One of the most important things is these people are sold a story that they're getting jobs in tech, but that is not true. It is the equivalent of sweatshop work, right? There is no upward mobility. There is no good paycheck. The other part I'll add is, especially if they're doing content moderation in particular leads to adverse mental health outcomes. If somebody is looking at horrible images of people being maimed, children being harmed, animal cruelty, that does something to you. And companies are just not being held accountable. One of the best things I've seen in the past few years is now unions forming for content moderators, for data cleaners.
So when I say something like AI is going to take away my son's jobs or it's going to take away my work, I'm actually not really understanding the problem in full.
So in 2018, I coined a phrase moral outsourcing. And there are articles in 2017, 2018 talking about how AI will replace a teacher. AI does not have free will. It doesn't want to do anything. Young people are not finding jobs because they're being automated by tech. Realize that this is not AI taking a job. A CEO has decided not to backfill a role or hire young people or create new roles. I think more than ever, that language is very important to place the blame linguistically where it belongs.
I wanted to maybe ask one last question before we bring Karen back into the conversation. I've heard you describe yourself as generally a tech optimist, but you've just painted a really dark picture. So how is that possible?
Well, for one, if I thought it was all loss and all gloom and doom, I would not be working in tech. I would go do something totally different. I'd probably, protest and set fire to data centers or something, right? Because truly, one must live one's values. But it is very important to point out the problems that exist. It is also important not to let it make you either indifferent to it or feel alienated from the ability to do something about it. So I am very careful when I talk about the doom and gloom narratives, because what I don't want is people walking away saying, well, I guess there's nothing I can do. Human agency is very important. So I want to make sure that people feel like there's something to be done. We actually have to think through what is a world in which AI is beneficial for us and how do we get there? That is just as important as pointing out all the problems and flaws.
So Karen, are you a tech optimist?
It's a great question. I guess when you said yes, what were you defining tech optimist as?
Somebody that imagines technology as a tool that can be used to create a better future.
Okay, then yes. I wanted to distinguish from how sometimes people define techno-optimism as just believing that any technology is good, which I don't subscribe to.
Mm-hmm.
But I do believe that technology can be good if we remember that ultimately it's meant to serve people.
Remind you nodding your head a lot.
Well, because what Karen's pointing at is and why she asked the clarifying question, what do you mean by techno-optimism? Because she's pointing out techno-solutionism, right? And the way I define techno-solutionism is actually very specific, and it is rooted in the ideology of Silicon Valley as well, which is that humanity is flawed and AI will fix it. It is in the language of Silicon Valley, the idea of hacking, biohacking, sleep hacking. So what does that mean? That means your body's need to sleep is a flaw that needs to be hacked. And you need to optimize. So one thing we're seeing right now in Silicon Valley culture is the rise of what's called 996. It is working 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. 6 days a week.
Ugh.
So but it's really interesting because it is its own hypocrisy. These same people are in the same breath saying, my product will make humanity better, but also I will not hire you unless you are willing to give your soul to this entire company.
Karen, how do you see the current situation with the development of the AI industry? And it seems like there's this massive pursuit of scale, right?
These companies, they are consolidating an extraordinary amount of political and economic power to the point that there's no other nation state in the world anymore that is more powerful than these companies. You could have argued at one point that the U.S. government was more powerful than them, but under the Trump administration, the U.S. government has had absolutely no interest in being a check on their power. And so business just doesn't cut it anymore as a descriptor. We have to look at the largest structures, political economic structures we've ever had. Empires. Empires of old and empires of AI lay claim to resources that are not their own. And so I reported on one of the communities in Uruguay where this community was literally competing with computers for life-sustaining resources.
And one of the things that kind of stunned me was that the data centers need to use fresh water in order to cool these machines.
Yeah, so the reason why it has to be fresh water is because any other type of water leads to the corrosion of the equipment or leads to bacterial growth. So data centers don't have to be cooled with water. They can also be cooled with giant air conditioners. But no one really does that because the energy bill would be extraordinary. And so they choose the water route because of it's technically more energy efficient. But then, of course, globally, we have a fresh water crisis. And Bloomberg came out with an investigation earlier this year that found that 2/3 of the data centers being built for the AI industry are now going into places that do not have enough fresh water for the people living there. 2/3.
Let me ask you this. As a user, I'm over here in my comfortable office in Berkeley, and I'm putting in a little prompt, make a picture of me in a spaceship flying around with a bunch of monsters chasing me. Like, what is the impact of that on folks on the ground that I don't necessarily see?
One study has found that roughly every time you query ChatGPT, this is not image generation, by the way, it's just text, because image generation is actually the most intensive. But if you're just typing into ChatGPT, it's 10 times the amount of energy as searching on Google. But with image generation, I forget, it was like a smartphone charge for one image or something like that.
Right. And then we multiply that by 2.5 billion prompts a day, and we've got a situation here.
You have an energy crisis, which is playing out globally. It's bananas.
So there's been a lot of articles recently about the impact of these chatbots on individuals, and I'm thinking of one in particular. It's the story of a 14-year-old whose parents are now suing Character AI. They're suing the company, accusing it of being responsible for their son's suicide. How do we get from there to thinking about where we actually need to go?
One of the most valuable things about people is that we have empathy, right? So we can put googly eyes on a pencil, and if you break that pencil, some part of you is going to feel bad. And that is actually
That's true. That's really true.
It's true. Like the way like I anthropomorphize my cat and dog, right? Like they live whole lives because I, as a human, looked at this creature that is nothing like me, and I decided I wanted to spend my hard-earned money giving it a life that I don't even have, right? But I do think, just going back to the question, it is such a beautiful thing about people that then becomes exploited. So first of all, in the design of these large language models are little things that incite us to think of them as alive. Everything from the fact that the 3 dots, go when it's thinking, the fact that they have names, the fact that they say I or me or I'm sorry. They don't have feelings. Why is it apologizing to you? These are all designed into it. So it is unsurprising that, given the very beautiful human lean towards empathy, that this child who's 14 thinks that this quote-unquote woman is in love with him. One of the most heartbreaking things about that story, about that young boy who completed suicide, is something his mother said. What she said was that my baby never even had a girlfriend. And for some reason, that kind of broke me, right? Because to think of this young boy thinking that he was so in love with this thing that wasn't alive, that he thought that if he killed himself, he would be with her. And the fact that he had never actually known what that kind of human connection looked like just made me so incredibly, incredibly sad.
Who's responsible in this particular instance?
Absolutely, the company.
And so, given all of this that we've just talked about, should the average person listening to this be like, I am not using AI ever?
So I personally don't use any generative AI.
So why don't you use generative AI?
I don't find it very useful for anything that I need to do in my life. And on top of that, because I report on all of the challenges of the production of this technology and the extreme ideologies that have cultivated within the industry that have been imbued within this technology, I just don't really want to be a part of it.
Mm-hmm.
I don't ever want to tell other people, don't use it at all, because like if it was extremely useful for me, I maybe would have made a different decision. But I do state my own personal stance because people have told me that it makes them feel like they finally have permission to not use generative AI. At the end of the day, though, I do think that individual action is insufficient in actually creating systemic change. What really needs to happen is collective action. And what we want is for there to be enough pressure on the general ecosystem to create alternative AI tools so that people can continue to get the benefits of AI technologies at a substantially less societal, environmental, labor cost.
Rumman, you've been engaged with many of these big companies. Is it fixable from within?
I appreciate what Karen said about collective action. I think that is one of the most important things. If there's one thing that comes out of all of this AI discussion is like the rebirth of unions, people understanding what collective good means again, because we've kind of forgotten it. That would actually be one of the most amazing things.
And we have seen quite a lot of collective action movements in which people and groups are pushing back artists and writers that are suing the companies, saying, no, you can't just take our intellectual property, and using litigation as a tool to try and strengthen copyright law. We're seeing communities around the world that are pushing back against data center development when that data center development is taking their energy, fresh water, without actually telling them what it's for. We're seeing students and teachers that are starting to have debates about AI within our educational institution. That's not just everyone use it all the time or not at all. Everyone has an active role being part of these types of collective action. And if we have just like 100,000 times more of that, I think we can ultimately get to a place where we're not actually just having these imperial companies dictate to the entire world what this technology is, how it should be used, and who it should serve.
And the thing is, the problem is, unless you are of a very particular generation of technology users, you were like a super nerd between the years of like 1994 to like 2002, which I was.
You're dating us.
You don't know what a world looks like where technology was basically a public utility and you just got to do with it kind of what you wanted and you owned it and you just did stuff with it. We are so accustomed to corporations defining it.
We're renters. We're sort of leasing even the technology that we use.
Correct. Everything is a subscription model.
Mm-hmm.
But to be very clear, it's not like people are clamoring and they know exactly what to do. They don't. Because we are so used to this very paternalistic model of people in tech defining what is good and what is bad, and the rest of us living in that world.
Okay, so how do we even imagine what could be an alternative to this? Like, what's a people's AI?
So it is unrealistic to say every human being on Earth is going to control all the knobs of every AI system. That is an unrealistic expectation. So what I think of it as is the diversification of the independent community of evaluators. So when I talk about bringing in communities, I mean literally people from their lived experience, people who speak languages that are underrepresented, people with backgrounds that are quite unique, even people, who are experts in, let's say, education rather than experts in AI, being part of creating the kind of AI educational system. So the reasons why schools are suffering so much is you get a bunch of tech bros who suddenly decide they want to disrupt education, and then they go make a model and they impose on a community and a practice and a field that they know nothing about often. I find it incredibly naive. So what does it look like for us to have ownership of how AI is used in that setting?
Karen, how do we build a better and more democratic AI?
Maybe I'll just share a story that I wrote about in my epilogue for what a more democratic AI could even look like. So one of my favorite stories that I've ever reported is about this group called Tahiku Media. They're a Maori radio station based in New Zealand, and they have broadcasted in the Te Reo Maori language for decades in a context where Te Reo Maori has been disappearing because of racist assimilation policies during the colonial era. And there's been this huge movement within New Zealand to try and revitalize Te Reo Maori, and Tahiku Media thought, we have all of this rich archival audio. where Te Reo Maori learners could literally hear the sounds of their ancestors to help them with their journey of reclaiming their language. But in order for this to become a legitimate educational resource, they need to transcribe the audio so that people can listen to it and then see it on the page. And then the challenge is that, okay, well, if we're going to need to transcribe this audio, there's just not enough Te Reo Maori speakers at that level of fluency that we could hire to do this manually. And so they thought, we need to develop an AI speech recognition model that understands Te Reo Maori and can do that transcription for us. And they went about building this AI system in just a fundamentally different way than Silicon Valley develops its AI models. First and foremost, they went to the community and asked, do you want this AI tool? It's really sad to think how radical that is, because it really should be the norm. Once the community said yes, they explained to the community, this is the kind of data we would need to train our model. And would you be willing to join us in this project? And because the community was already really bought into the project, it only took a few days for them to gather like a couple hundred hours of audio that was transcribed. And the thing is, a couple hundred hours is teeny tiny compared to the amount of data that's used to develop OpenAI's models or any of the other companies' models. But because it was high quality, they can actually train a model with that little bit of data and have it be performant. So the first iteration of the model was already over 80% accurate. And then they iterated until the model started becoming very, very accurate. And finally, they promised to the community, now that we have your data, we're not just going to allow anyone to have access to this data and potentially use it in ways that ultimately harm our community. And there needs to be an approval process. The community needs to have the buy-in. So at every step, there's what Rumman was saying, there was ownership and agency from the community to shape how the technology was developed, what it was used for, how it serves them. And Chihiko Media also used it as an opportunity to train the next generation of data scientists and AI model developers within their Maori community so that they could continue to expand the number of AI technologies that they would be able to develop by themselves, for themselves.
For me, the beautiful coda to this is that one of the lead researchers at Chihiko Media is Native Hawaiian, Kanaka Maoli, and he's part of an effort to do the same for the Hawaiian language, Alela Hawaii, that they did for Te Reo Maori. My great-grandparents spoke Hawaiian. My great-great-grandparents spoke it fluently. But then Americans suppressed the language for 3 generations. And now my nieces and my nephews, they've come back to the language, and I've been taking lessons, and I've been even practicing with AI. And just thinking about this AI project with Native Hawaiian speakers, I'm getting choked up about it, actually. I mean, the recovery of our native languages that empires tried to ban, and this project being rooted in native values, that to me signifies some of the real promise of what this technology can do. Thank you both for joining us on this episode of Notes from the Edge.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thanks for having us.
Coming up after this musical interlude, my conversation with my old homie DJ Shadow, aka Josh Davis. Stay tuned.
In the beginning, well, I didn't know. As time passed on, still didn't know. But this time, I'm gonna try it my way. I'm gonna live like my way. This time, I'm gonna try it my way. I'm gonna live like my way.
This is Notes from the Edge. I'm Jeff Chang. Some of you may not know this, but when I was a very young man, I was a huge hip-hop fan, and I had a radio show. at a little station called KDVS on the campus of the University of California at Davis. And one of the people who was a fervent listener of our shows was a young man who called himself DJ Shadow. He was probably about 17 or 18, but he began listening to my show, and we quickly became friends. We bonded over a mixtape that he brought in one night and asked me to play.
A strange voice from far away said,
"Let the rhythm hit 'em." Of the arsenal, I got artillery, lyrics and ammo, rhymes and rhythms, then I'ma give 'em piano. Bring a bulletproof vest, nothing to ricochet. Ready aim at the brain and what the trigger say.
It was the best remix that I'd ever heard of an Eric B. and Rakim song. And that's how our friendship began, in a little radio studio in the basement of Freeborn Hall. And it continues today in a studio at KALW. I'm really happy to have with me my old friend, Josh Davis, also known as DJ Shadow.
Hey, thank you for the invitation. It's great to see you.
Yes, brother. Maybe just to get started, like for me, when I met you, I was hearing a lot of really amazing stuff in hip hop, which is, of course, a musical genre and a culture that's always had a deep relationship with technology. And hip hop was really putting it at the forefront, tuned turntables on a microphone. You didn't even have that when you were getting started.
So I grew up, my dad was doing construction. My mom, she was doing like the equivalent of like after school daycare stuff. So we didn't have a lot of money, and I was obsessed with the radio. So, my stepdad, I think he bought it for $1 at a garage sale, a little transistor radio, one speaker. And my grandparents had handed me down a portable cassette recorder, the kind that you would set on a desk in a meeting and record the conversation, And so I would just put the mic of the cassette recorder up to this single speaker.
When you were coming on the scene, you were sampling records, which had always been a part of hip hop. It goes back to this idea of turning the record player into an instrument.
Yep.
So I'm wondering, how were you thinking about technology back then?
I mean, where there's a will, there's a way. And that's part of the ethos of hip hop itself. You know what I mean? To me, technology was always a means to an end. It's about ideas.
Mm-hmm.
It's a blank slate. It's just like with sampling. People did it badly, and people did it incredibly well. It all came down to the artist's sensibility.
One way to look at the history of popular music in America is as one of technological disruptions. That the invention of the record and the record player was a disruption.
Electricity, if you want to.
If you want to go back to that, right? But moving on up, the invention of cassettes. At some point, people in the industry were like, this is going to lead to piracy and it's going to put all these musicians out of business. And then we fast forward to the MP3 era and Napster, they're saying the same kinds of things.
That idea of technology putting musicians out of work goes back even to when DJs started playing more and more in clubs rather than house bands. It's a understandable concern, for anybody who invests all their time and their energy in learning how to do something, and then almost overnight it's sort of passé and no longer relevant.
Mm-hmm. Were you finding yourself in a position to have to defend the technology as a result of using it as your method?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think sampling only became accepted when the big artists started doing it. Artists like Madonna and George Michael. And once all these sort of, the superstars started doing it, I think it broke down a lot of the resistance, the critical resistance to it. Initially, it's sort of shock and, well, wait a minute. What are the rules, right? And the Turtles suing De La Soul and Jimmy Castor suing the Beastie Boys and all those early lawsuits. And then over time, it's just kind of like the horses left the barn. Everybody's doing it. And I think that's kind of what always happens with new technology.
Is there an analogy here? Is the analogy between sampling and AI correct?
AI, when I think of it in relation to music, I just don't see any connection between sampling and AI. I understand there's some relevance and some genuine kind of artistic moments that can come out of it. But I don't know if I can kind of sit there and go, oh, well, AI is sampling 2.0.
You don't think that there's a relationship between the development of sampling and the development of AI?
I just know from using AI, like in some sessions, and just kind of going, okay, well, what are the creative pathways here? Like, I'll give you an example of something I did. So for fun, me and another producer, we loaded a sample. Just instead of taking a sample and making a beat out of it, let's put the sample into AI and give it a few keywords. Like, we want you to make a cover that's ethereal with harsh feedback or harsh noise. And then it would just kick out a few different versions of that. We did it like maybe 20 times, and 2 or 3, we were like, that's actually amazing. Like, this could almost be released right now.
Really?
Yeah. But of course, we wouldn't do that because there's nothing to that. You know what I mean? It would be like me just finding a record and just counterfeiting it.
Let's pause there for a second and unpack that, right? Because an artist could just say at that particular point, we generated these great results. That sounds amazing. I'm going to release that.
Yeah.
The only thing holding you back from doing that is your standards.
You're absolutely right, which is why I don't feel it's my place to denigrate somebody who does go and do that. But if you ask me, do you hear artistic possibilities in AI? My answer would be yes, but I also am able to say, but it's not for me. The only thing I can do is come up with my own sense of right and wrong, sense of what's creatively and intellectually inspiring and what isn't, my own sense of like, what do I value in music? All the stuff that AI was outputting, if you do it enough, like over the course of a few days, after a while, you're just like, nah. There's some cool moments. And like, maybe I could take that cover version and stem it out and extract this one little accident and incorporate it just like a sample.
Stems are basically musical tracks, isolated drums,
like,
or guitars or bass or those kinds of things.
Correct. I could incorporate it just like a sample in the same way that someone used to rip YouTube audio or whatever. I mean, it's all there to be used. But I mean, do I think it's going to eventually happen where people have an inherent suspicion of anything human created, thinking that it's flawed? Yes, probably. And I think probably it will happen with music. But that's not anything I can personally control. I mean, the one thing I would say is simply that, you know, on the two different sides of technology, the side that's usually saying, no, stop worrying, it's all going to be fine. Those people are usually the money behind X technology. And usually the sort of, hang on, let's be smart about this crowd, you know, let's really figure this out before we can't claw it back ever. Usually they're right.
Is music something that's ineffably and indivisibly human?
Only to the extent that the things that we make as humans are extensions of us. In other words, if I buy a synthesizer and play its little demo, I know that music isn't being made by humans, but I know it's an extension of a computer programmer that was human. So it depends, right? I mean, like, if I listen to it like an AI cover and kind of go, well, I guess humans built this platform and they fed it a bunch of stuff. I mean, maybe it's an extension of us. You know, I just think everybody has their own definition of how far is too far. I mean, to a lot of senior citizens living in New York City in 1980, hip hop just sounded like utter garbage. The worst thing. This is the end right here. It can't get any lower than this. So when it comes to AI, you know, we have to reckon with it. I hope that something good comes out of it because, you know, I want music to continue to evolve. I don't want it to freeze in place or become something like, oh no, hip hop was only at its best in 1988. It'll never get any better. I never felt that way as a hip hop fan, much less a music lover.
So you haven't exactly bought into a future where AI is the driving force in music creation. But as you said earlier, it is coming.
I mean, it's here, but um, synthesizers were supposed to replace, remember that awful patch for like horns on synthesizers in the 80s?
And strings
And
and
strings,
bass.
and
Yeah, and all
you
that
you
stuff.
all
Yeah.
kind of you sit there and you go, well, I guess will it replace it? I don't know. Regardless of what happens, there will always be an audience, just as there are always audiences for classical music, and if you hear somebody play a trumpet or somebody play the drums really well, or this actually brings back into sampling a little bit, because when I moved away from only using samples, some people will go, well, why? Why are you abandoning your sound source? I'm like, I'm not. Listen, if I want a kick or a snare, why limit myself to the kicks and snares I find on records? Why can't I also use a drum machine patch, or like go out and record a live drummer? Sound is sound. I mean, I use anything that's available to me, including AI at some point. If I find something that I think like, oh, that can't be replicated, this is something totally new. And so hopefully what it is a new set of tools, a new set of colors for the palette to paint with. But in the same way that I don't think of synthesizers the same way I think about live musicians, that's why I think sampling is its own thing, AI is its own thing. I don't think there's any kind of 2.0, 3.0 dimension to it personally, because I think that sort of sells both short in a weird way. To bring it full circle with sampling, you could have a old 45 RPM record, put it into a stem tool on AI and be like, I only want the bass line and the vocal reverb. And then if you only wanted to take, a bass note or a little vocal trail, you could, whereas in my day, you couldn't. And some of the results I've seen from that is really amazing. You can hear some computer output that sparks something and just kind of makes you think about music in a way you never had before. Those sorts of musical inspirational tools have been around since music's been around, whether it's music books or music theory classes or anything like that.
One last question. What's the role of music right now?
Honestly, I feel like it's the same as it's ever been. It's to try to make sense of the world around you. It's to try to distill all the noise. I mean, every single day we are fed information we didn't ask for. We're fed opinions we didn't ask for. I mean, everybody's trying to reach into your pocket at all times. We know this. And music is a way, for me at least, to silence the outside world and to try to tap into something more profound, more universal than, my little point on a Google map.
Oh, man. Thank you so much. It's always great to see you, and it's been a wonderful conversation.
Hey, thank you for the invitation. It's great to catch up.
Thank you for listening to Notes from the Edge. And thanks again to our guests DJ Shadow, Karen Hao, and Rumman Chowdhury. A big mahalo to our whole team, David Boyer, Kenny Keita, David Kwan, and James Cass. Our theme song is Imani by Black Alicious, produced by Chief Excel. Rest in peace, Gift of Gab. Notes from the Edge is made possible by KALW Public Media. Support for Notes from the Edge comes from the Ford Foundation, working to build a world where all people have the opportunity to live with dignity and the resources to achieve their full potential. We also want to thank Lara Sapanaro and Mike Stern and Christina Rizga for your generous support. This is Jeff Chang, and this is Notes from the Edge.
now approaching midnight.